Hello, this is Gallifreyan Jedi speaking, and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. And for this month's blog, the month of September, I will be doing it on the topic of Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic. And I will inform everyone from the get-go that I've decided to split this topic up into two parts. Reason being, the first reason for this is because the topic of the Galactic Republic, doing my research and everything, is very vast and complex. Secondly, the amount of notes that I've taken for this particular blog are more detailed than the previous videos that I have done for my channel, for my YouTube channel. And so, if I tried to keep this try to do this entire topic all in one video, it probably would be overwhelming. And I know that I'm used to making videos, 2-hour videos, and even one of them over 2 hours. So circa around that, anywhere from 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I'm used to doing that, but this I felt was a little bit more complex, and might be a little rough to try to do it all in one blog. So I've decided to split it up into two, in which this month of September, I'll be dealing with the infrastructure of the Galactic Republic. I'm going to do that section first, the infrastructure of the Galactic Republic. And for the month of October, which will be part 2 of Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic, I'll be doing the part 2 of that topic, but dealing with the history of the Galactic Republic. Now, we'll be covering a little bit of history today in the infrastructure, but majority of the history of the Galactic Republic I'm going to save for the month of October. But anyway, with that being said, let me read, for my notes, the definition of the Galactic Republic, and then what I'm going to do is when I'm finished that section, then I'm going to go on to giving you the outline of where I'm going, the outline ahead of time, so you can know where I'm going with this particular topic. Well, anyway, let's jump in, and with no further ado, let's jump in and talk about this topic of the Galactic Republic. The Galactic Republic was the ruling government of the galaxy that existed for more than 25,000 years, until the establishment of the First Galactic Empire in 19 BBY. Now keep in mind, remember, BBY stands before the Battle of Yavin, so that's how we count. ABY is after the Battle of Yavin in Episode 4, A New Hope, and BBY is before the Battle of Yavin, which was in Episode 4, A New Hope. So just remember that dating, how I date that. Throughout its existence, the state was commonly known as the Republic. In post-Republic era and beyond, it was remembered as the Old Republic. It was also rarely known as the First Galactic Republic. And interesting with that is probably when it was referred to the First Galactic Republic was probably centuries or over several millennia before where the movies take place, because they view the citizens of the galaxy, the citizens of the Republic, probably viewed, when they established the Republic, which I'll get into a little bit later, established the Republic 25,000 years prior, that was the first democratic elected government of the galaxy. And so they used to refer to it as the First Galactic Republic, because it's the first government or democratic government of the galaxy that was established in their records, amongst the records and historical records, shall I say. But you will also notice in Episode 4 and on, they will refer, Star Wars Episode 4, New Hope, and beyond that, they will refer to as the Galactic Republic as the Old Republic. And it's interesting, it's just like very similar to the First World War. When the First World War took place in Europe, it was essentially the war was essentially known as the Great War, and it wasn't World War I at the time because they didn't have any other reference. But when World War II broke out, then they said these are two world wars. The First World War, it started from 1914 to 1918, I believe, And then during the Second World War, that's where they counted that's how they counted the First World War, the Second World War. The Second World War from 1938 to 1945. So essentially, how that changed, because keep in mind, the Republic, the Galactic Republic, was just known as, either people referred to it as the Galactic Republic or the Republic. But after the Republic fell under Palpatine, it was rechristened the Empire, then and from history then on in referred to it as the Old Republic, because the Galactic Republic, which existed for 25,000 years, now is gone, so they refer to it, that's how it got its name changed, as the Old Republic. But I just thought that I'd throw those little tidbits of information out. Anyway, let's go on with this definition. The Galactic Republic was a galaxy-wide spanning government that was a representative democracy. It was composed of various star systems, sectors, and member worlds throughout most of the known civilized galaxy. It had a centralized government that consisted of 3 branches, which were legislative, executive, and judicial. Keep in mind, I'm going to be dealing with that since I'm talking about the infrastructure of the Galactic Republic in this blog. I'm going to go into some detail about the nature of government and talk about now the 3 divisions of the branch of government is very match. It matches very closely to our American government, because our American government has 3 branches. We have Congress, the legislative branch, and then we have the President of the United States, which is the executive branch, and then we've got the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the judicial branch. So I'm going to be going into some more detail today in this blog about the 3 branches of government in the Galactic Republic. But anyway, moving on, for most of its history, the Galactic Republic was the dominant galactic power in the galaxy. Although the Republic was supposed to be a strong, centralized galactic government, it had failed to be so, for it rather evolved into a union of sovereign planets that formed for the purpose of collective security and economic prosperity. During the last days of the Galactic Republic, it was defined as a benevolent but ineffective galactic government that was enmeshed in layers of bureaucracy, as well as being plagued by political and corporate corruption. Interesting enough, when I mentioned that before, I don't want to make too much comments over this, because I'm going to be dealing with that very topic, not only in the infrastructure, but in next month's blog, when I deal with the history of the Galactic Republic, the corruption and the effectiveness of that government. But anyway, the thing is that its original emphasis is to bring all these star systems into one collective government, which they did. But there was always, just like what we do in the United States, we're fighting over the autonomy of the state. Well, for them, it's the autonomy of their particular planet, or their particular sector of space. So they're members of the Galactic Republic, but they also want to have certain sovereign rights as a planet. The planet, their government, their laws, and stuff like that. So that was the struggle that was going on with that. But anyway, I thought that is the basic definition of the Galactic Republic that I wanted to give, and to share the outline. Like I said, today's blog is going to be on the infrastructure, so I'm going to be talking, and also a little bit of history, but the main historical part will be saved for the month of October. But my outline goes is, I'm going to first talk about the origin and formation of the Galactic Republic. Secondly, secondly, I'm going to be talking about the government and politics of the Galactic Republic. Those are the 2 things that I'm going to be covering today, and then next month I'm going to be dealing with the history of the Galactic Republic, or the history of the Old Republic, which way you want to call it. But anyway, that's just essentially I'm going to be saving majority of the history, like I said, for next month. But anyway, let's jump in and talk about the origin and formation of the Galactic Republic. First of all, let's talk about the formation. Let's get into a little bit of history. And keep in mind, what I recommend, if you haven't seen it, is my video on my YouTube channel called Does Earth Exist in the Star Wars Universe? I encourage you to watch that prior to listening to this,
because that might give you a little bit of background on the history I'm about to give you, because I deal with the prehistory of Star Wars before 25,000 years ago, when the Galactic Republic was formed. And I talk about the origin of the human species, the origin of the human race, and how they went to how they explored space in the early days and colonized various worlds and made their way out to the rims, and talking about the expansion era, where humans made contact with alien races, and then they set up colonies and trade and trade and barter and cooperative that way, and as they move further out into the colonies regions and the inner rim and the mid rim and then the outer rim. So that would be very helpful to look at that, because I go into a lot of details about that history. So when I mention the expansionist era, you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyway, let's jump in and talk about the formation of the Galactic Republic. During the expansionist era, humans established daughter colonies in the colonies region. Remember, the colonies region is the first colonies that humans established in their travels, and they refer to it as these are the colonies, not the core worlds, but they made it out to this section, which they renamed the colonies, because these are the colonies that humans established. That's the next section after the that is the core. The colonies is the next section past the core worlds, the region of the core, colony region that made their way as far as the outer rim. Keep in mind, before the Galactic Republic was established, these humans had explored or traveled out to the outer rim and explored a little bit of the outer rim and even established colonies there. So they went as far as the outer rim to establish colonies during the pre-Republic era. During that time, humans and Duros reverse engineered the force-sensitive technologies of the Infinite Empire, where they created the first hyperdrive propulsion system, allowing starships to enter hyperspace to traverse the vast distances of space at speeds faster than light. And thus, they were key technology in the foundation of intergalactic society, trade, and war. During the expansionist era, humans played a major role in the colonization of the galaxy, as well as the development of the galaxy and galactic politics. From their expansionist ideology philosophy, these humans came into conflict, which resulted. Now, here's where we get to the nitty-gritty. From the expansionist ideology philosophy, these humans came into conflict, which resulted in the Unification Wars. And from the Unification Wars resulted in the formation of the First Galactic Republic in the year 25,053 BBY. It was during the year of 25,053 BBY that following the Unification Wars, that humans ratified the Galactic Constitution, which is where and when the First Galactic Republic was born. So it's interesting, just to make a couple notes concerning that. Remember that the planet Doro was one of the planets that humans explored, that they first contact with other alien races, where they worked with the humans in developing technology. And remember, the early technology of space travel was based on the force-based technologies, going all the way back to prehistory from the Infinite Empire. But they developed the hyperdrive propulsion system. Remember I talked about the hyperdrive propulsion system? It's an engine, a very complex piece of technology, but it's an engine which could allow you to open up almost like another dimension, folding of space, and it allowed starships to travel. When they're in there, travel faster than the speed of light, because remember, Einstein's theory of relativity is that light is the constant, and light is the constant, and you can't accelerate any kind of mass up to the speed of light or beyond the speed of light. But this hyperdrive propulsion system created these hyperspace lanes, which they could travel through hyperspace, travel to different planets at a very short time, because in hyperspace you're floating in space. You're in another dimension, and you can travel faster than light speed, in essence, when you're in hyperspace. And that way they can make it to different parts of the galaxy in shorter time, less than hundreds or thousands of years it would take it at just at a normal rate. But keep in mind the expansionist era was where humans were exploring further and further out into the galaxy, and obviously they had some kind of expansionist ideology, a manifesto, believing that they were going to explore the galaxy and colonize it and develop a system of government and cooperation. Well, anyway, but anyway, moving on is talk about the Unification Wars. The Unification Wars were the thing that made that formed the first Galactic. It was able to form the first Galactic Republic. Out of these Unification Wars, the first Galactic Republic was born. So, but anyway, moving on. Essentially, that's with that. I think I have some more details of the Unification Wars. I didn't go into a lot of detail, trying to skim through and find what is essential. So I didn't go into a lot of history about the Unification Wars, which is actually there's still dealing with prehistory republic in the galaxy. But anyway, moving on. During the early days of the Galactic Republic, the majority of political, military, economic leaders were humans. Most humans in the Galactic Republic lived on predominant human worlds, although there were many humans that lived on planets where they lived alongside aliens, primarily on their homeworlds of these aliens, as well as many other species. Humans were more likely to live among non-humans on the cosmopolitan core worlds or in the frontier worlds of the outer rim of the galaxy, such as Tatooine. Predominantly human worlds outside of the core include Eriadu, Naboo, Socorro, and Bakra. Well, if you read the Star Wars EU, especially the True Bakra, that deals with a predominant human population. Of course, it was populated by the Empire, the Galactic Empire. Imperial agents colonized Bakra. Everyone knows Planet Naboo from the prequel trilogy. That was the home of Palpatine and also Padme Amidala, etc., etc. But anyway, let's move on. During the pre-Republic era, human populations became so great that it led to their societies to develop what is known as humanocentrism. Centrism, if I'm pronouncing that right, which was the source for the human use of the term alien to describe non-human species, and in some cases tended towards non-human speciesism. Human-centrism quite often led to racism for alien species, and which resulted in humans either enslaving aliens or casting them as second-class citizens. So essentially, it's sort of like speciesism that I just mentioned, the description of the definition of speciesism in relation to humanocentrism in the Star Wars galaxy. Essentially, that's just one step below the Nazi regime's kind of idea of they're the Supermen, and everyone else is below them, second-class citizens. Now, what makes this different is they didn't try to perform a Holocaust on all the alien races that they've encountered, but still, there was this developing thing that non-human species were subpar, subhuman, or sentience, and they shouldn't be treated as equal with humans. So essentially, it was a form of racism for these alien species, and even though that they weren't out for a genocidal cause to destroy them all, still humans on various planets, depending on their government, society, they enslaved aliens, made them slaves. In other places where they didn't have slavery, they cast them as second-class citizens. They didn't respect them as equal with humans and equal as first-class citizens. So that was what humanocentrism is in relation to what the definition of speciesism. Okay, moving on. During the year 25,000 BBY, 53 years after the formation of the Galactic Republic, because remember, the Galactic Republic came into the year 2553 BBY, 20, so it's 53 years. The official, let's just say this Galactic Republic, the Galactic Republic was born, came into existence in in the year 25,053 BBY. So it's 53 years later. We're dealing with 53 years later after the Galactic Republic was born. But anyway, after the formation of the Galactic Republic, the planet Coruscant became the capital world of the Republic. Also, the Perliman trade route was mapped, linking Coruscant to the planet Osa, Osas, if I'm pronouncing it right, which ultimately resulted in bringing the Jedi Knights into the Galactic Republic. Republic scouts made contact with Jedi Order on Osas, and Jedi Master Hon Tier accompanied the scouts back to the Republic. After conferring for several weeks, the Jedi Order pledged themselves to become the defenders of peace and justice throughout the galaxy for the Galactic Republic. So it's interesting. I'm not going to be talking about too much of this, is because it's very, it's very complex. But not only that, but I when I have my blog on the Jedi Order, I'll be going into a lot of detail about the history of the Jedi Order. But they were on this planet at the time of Osas when the Republic scouts had made first contact with them, and ultimately, now they joined this government, Galactic Government, and they pledged themselves loyalty as defenders of peace and justice throughout the galaxy for the Galactic Republic. So anyway, I won't go into too much detail for that, but that's what we see what's going on with with the nature. Now I'm going to be talking a little bit about today in the infrastructure, the relationship between the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic, which doesn't always mesh or whatever. It essentially, those two, the Republic, the Senate, and the Jedi Order had clashed over several things. But anyway, the point is that it was around that year, 25,000 BBY, that the Galactic Republic did meet the Jedi Order for the first time, and the Jedi Order pledged their allegiance to the Galactic Republic. Now, with that being said, let's go on to part 2. Like I said, the formation was the part 1. We're going to deal with part 2. Now we're going to talk about part 2, government and politics of the Galactic Republic. And that's where I'm going to be talking mostly about the infrastructure of the Republic. Let's first talk about, this is very important, and keep in mind, just want you to think for a little bit, so I don't have to worry about going into detail about this later, that the, where am I at here, that the society, the government and society of the Galactic Republic is probably a mishmash, a combined amalgam, shall we say, of United States government, how that functions, and also British Parliament. So it has elements of both. The way they govern themselves, it's almost like if the United States and England became one and brought their two forms of government together, which both America and England are democracies, to keep that in mind. So if they brought their two forms of democratic government together, this is something like the Galactic Republic is what you would get. But anyway, let's deal with the Galactic Constitution, because that's very important. The Galactic Constitution was the founding document and highest set of laws in the Galactic Republic. It was written and signed during the year 25,053 BBY. Remember, that's when the Constitution was signed. It's written and established and signed. That's when officially the Republic was born. But BBY, okay, and it was written and signed during the year 25,053 BBY by members of the House of Organa, so to unify the core worlds into a singular democratic and representative galactic government. The Galactic Constitution existed throughout the history of the Galactic Republic. It remained the Republic's highest set of laws, guaranteeing a Bill of Rights for all citizens of the Republic. So the Constitution, their Galactic Constitution is very similar to, if you're talking about Great Britain, it's very similar to the Magna Carta. You know British history with the signing of the Magna Carta back at the time of King John in the Middle Ages. But it's also very similar to the Constitution we have as the United States, guaranteeing rights to certain citizens, democracy and freedom and justice for all. But it's interesting, it was mentioned here, there's the House of Organa, Organa on Alderaan, which Bail Organa and his adopted daughter Leia are from that lineage. But anyway, the Galactic it was also too, just to express this, that the Galactic Constitution was their high set of laws, just like our system of government. The Constitution, U.S. Constitution, is the high set of laws. That means if there are laws either in the federal level or on the state level that violate the Constitution, the Constitution trumps those laws. That means the lower laws of the federal government and also of the state, if they're in contradiction with the laws of the Constitution, then the U.S. Constitution trumps any other law in the United States. That's how it's supposed to work. Of course, with fallible human beings, we can see if we watch the news and we're keeping up with current events throughout our nation and throughout the world, we know that it's not always functioning that way, but it should function. A constitution should function as the highest set of laws. With a republic, their galactic constitution, whatever other laws that either the Galactic Republic has established or individual planets and sectors of space have established, essentially the Constitution, their galactic constitution, was the highest set of laws, and that trumped any other law from any other sovereign planet or even other laws in the Galactic Republic. Anyway, let's go on. The Constitution set the planet Coruscant as the Republic's capital. Set official galactic language as Old Galactic Standard, later officially became known as Galactic Basic Standard, and made the official currency the Galactic Credit Standard. The Constitution made the President of the Senate, later known as the Supreme Chancellor, the head of state and head of government, and the Ministry of Defense. Okay, bear with me for a second. Ministry of Defense, ultimately known as the Commander-in-Chief. The Senate was granted the authority to levy a military and regulate trade. Just interesting in reviewing this, and make my point, had established the Old Galactic Standard language, which later became known as the Galactic Basic Standard. So, just to emphasize that, even though a lot of people sit there and say, well, why is all these people that live on various planets and all these aliens and stuff like that, how come they speak English? Well, technically, in Star Wars universe, they're not speaking English. They're speaking a language called Basic, or as it's known as Galactic Basic Standard, which used to be called the Old Galactic Standard. But basically, they're not speaking English, they're speaking Basic. But just to cover that the Constitution made that universal. Just like English now has become a language that more and more people around the world are learning, sort of like a universal language. But even though you can still tell, when you're watching the Star Wars movies, you see like the Hutts and Rhodians and other aliens speaking their own native language. There are some races or some beings in the galaxy that still speak their own native language, but the Galactic Basic Standard was the universal language. And of course, the Galactic Credit Standard, that was their currency that they used. And of course, the Constitution made the President of the Senate, later known as the Supreme Chancellor, but he was the head of state, head of government, and Ministry of Defense, ultimately known as Commander-in-Chief. And that's what our president essentially is. I mean, the Supreme Chancellor is very close to the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of England. So, keeping that. And, of course, we refer to our president as the Commander-in-Chief. But also, the Supreme Chancellor in the Galactic Republic was also called the Commander-in-Chief. And it also ensured, the Constitution ensured that the Senate was granted the authority for the military, to levy military and to regulate trade. And that's true for our Constitution because the Senate, being the legislative branch, they're the only ones who can declare war against another country. It can't be the president, or can't be the executive branch with the president, or the judicial branch with the judges. It can't. The Constitution says only the Senate. Well, the Galactic Constitution said the Galactic Senate had the right to levy the military or to regulate trade. Moving on, the Constitution had strict provisions against persecution of one's personal beliefs. Okay, so right there, I want to make a comment. Well, let me finish this, then I'll make no comments. Two notable clauses of the Constitution were the Rights of Sentience. Now keep in mind, this is important. The Rights of Sentience Act Amendment and the Contemplains Herme. That's a very complex word there, but I'll try to describe both. The Rights of Sentience Act, or amendment, provided the rights that all citizens in the Republic were entitled to, which primarily were laws against speciesism. The first was to formally outlaw slavery throughout the Republic. The second was a declaration that all sentient life forms are all equal, and they should be treated equally socially and by law. And the third was that all citizens of the Galactic Republic were entitled to all the rights enshrined in the Constitution, which included suffrage, protection from undue hardship, due process under the law for all citizens of the Republic, and the protection against the unlawful search and seizure by the government. Now, that's what the Rights of Sentience Amendment guarantees, those rights to all citizens, not just human, but even aliens, making a declaration. Well, anyway, let me finish this. The Contemplains Herme, which was a clause in the Constitution, and it applied solely to the Carillion sector, allowed for the Carillion system to enact temporary autonomy in exchange for withdrawal from the Senate. So that Contemplains Herme was a special dispensation for the Carillion system alone, not for the entire galaxy. But I guess the Carillions, when being part of constructing the Galactic Constitution, made that amendment, or required that amendment to be in there for them to sign the Constitution. Sign the Constitution when establishing the Republic back then. But anyway, the one I'm focusing on is the right to sentience, because essentially that did what our Constitution does, and also the Magna Carta in England. It's giving it basically is forbidding slavery is outlawed. Remember in episode 1 when the crew lands on Tatooine and Padme says, I thought, finding out that Anakin and Shmi, his mother Shmi, were slaves, Padme goes, I thought slavery was outlawed in the Republic, and of course she said the Republic doesn't exist here, because even though Tatooine is in the area where the Galactic Republic is sovereign over, Tatooine is sort of off limits to them, probably not a member world of the Republic, so therefore the Hutts, which were controlling Tatooine at the time, they had slavery. There was slavery among them there. But the Constitution of the Galactic Republic outlawed slavery, and then it gave the amendments to that amendment, the right of sentience, guaranteed that all life forms are going to be treated equal, whether you're alien or human. You're all equal, and they should be treated equally, but in society and also by law. So there shouldn't be any prejudice or undue process of law because you're treating one race better or with more rights than another race. So that's what it outlawed. And also the amendments to that is that they guaranteed the citizens of the Galactic Republic were entitled, to certain rights in the Constitution, which is suffrage and protection from undue hardship, due process in the law. That means you can't just lock somebody up and keep them in jail because you don't like them or you think they committed a crime. They have to have their day in court. So and they have to have it properly done. But basically they, you get the picture that, they were entitled to due process under the law and protection against unlawful search and seizure, which is our Fourth Amendment. That the government can't just come in and to your house anytime that they want and confiscate things. They have to have a warrant signed by a judge. Well, same here. Essentially, that's what's going on here. Now, I covered the contemplations of Hermes, so I don't think I need to rehash that. Let's deal with the Galactic Senate. Let's talk about the Galactic Senate. The Galactic Senate, also referred to as the Galactic Congress, was the legislative and executive branch of the Galactic Republic that was located on the planet Coruscant. The primary duties of the Senate were to mediate any disputes between the various star systems in the galaxy, between various planets and cultures, as well as regulate trade between star systems. The Galactic Senate's main job was to protect and care for the citizens of the Galactic Republic that were in need, and to provide mutual defense in the face of threats to the Republic. So essentially, I think, like I said, according to the Constitution, it made the planet Coruscant the capital of the galaxy, the capital of the Republic. And that's where the Galactic Senate came to meet, huge metropolitan planet. So it would be natural. It's almost like their version of Washington, D.C., or New York, or London. That's what the planet Coruscant was like for the entire galaxy. And I just pretty much laid out the details of what the Senate's responsibilities were to be. So it's pretty straightforward. I don't think you need to make any comment about that. The Galactic Senate, moving on, the Galactic Senate was made up of over 2,000 senators and representatives, representing sectors, systems, individual planets, and even corporations and guilds. The full Senate convened on a regular basis, although the meetings were unscheduled in advance, could sometimes even reach up to 100 full assemblies per year. That's a lot. So you think of 100 assemblies where the Galactic Senate gets together on Coruscant to discuss laws in governing the galaxy. That's interesting. The order of the day was composed of a series of day-long meetings in committees and subcommittees in formal and informal situations. Most negotiations and diplomacy, however, happened behind the scenes in the ambassadorial offices behind the Senate platforms. So essentially what that's saying is that when you have these major issues especially with law and trade and other things, that the Senate usually came together in that hall to discuss it and rule on it. But there was these subcommittees, and through these subcommittees they debated and their own propositions for laws and their own suggestions. And it's saying here that basically a lot of the negotiations of diplomacy, instead of making it complex in the Great Hall, essentially, in order to avoid bringing it before this body of the Senate, making it more complex than it needed to be, a lot of negotiations and diplomacy happened behind the scenes. Ambassadorial offices in the Great Hall of the Senate behind the platforms. So hopefully I covered that. There's no confusion on that. I don't want to confuse anybody, but that's the role of the Galactic Senate. Now we're talking about the Galactic Senate and the government of the Galactic Republic. Let's talk about the three branches now of the three branches of the Galactic Senate or the Galactic Republic. The three branches of government. Let's start out with the legislative branch. The first branch of the Galactic Republic's government is the legislative branch. In the Galactic Senate, each member star system sent a representative senator to the central legislative body of the Galactic Senate. on the planet Coruscant. Senators acted as ambassadors of their home worlds, and member worlds were able to maintain a limited form of autonomy within the local government and society, in accordance with local beliefs, customs, and traditions. In some star systems, a senator was elected to the post of the Galactic Senate. On other planets, government appointed that senator. So basically, the legislative branch works a lot like our Senate, in which each state sends a representative. And they're technically, these senators are supposed to represent the constituents. So, pick a state like Pennsylvania. Hypothetically, Pennsylvania has its own senators. They send send down to Washington, and they're technically supposed to represent the needs of the people of Pennsylvania, who are his constituents. That was their role. But this in Star Wars, with the Galactic Senate, each planet early on, the Galactic Senate, each planet sent their own representative, which he or she was supposed to represent the constituents, which is the people of their home planet where they came from. Because they sent a representative to Coruscant for senators to, they acted as ambassadors for their home worlds. But also, too, and this is according to the Constitution, the Galactic Constitution, is that it was allowed, each planet was allowed a certain form. Because keep in mind, each planet, whether it was humans that colonized those planets or it was other alien races, they all came from a different form of society and government. Just like here in the United States, we're one country, but we have 50 states. And there's different cultures throughout our country, different traditions and cultures. So the Constitution guarantees the right of a limited form of autonomy for these planets, that as long as their laws don't contradict anything of the Galactic Constitution of the Republic, the laws and society and traditions of each planet were allowed a certain amount of autonomy to continue to operate as they are, with their limited form, with their form of autonomy. They were allowed to govern themselves and hold their traditions of society according to their local beliefs, customs, and traditions. So, and like I said, it says here that some star systems, when they send it to the center, they elect it to the post. Another ways, the government appointed the senator. So, essentially, hopefully, you're make that too confusing. But well, anyway, let's move on. Let's move on. Apologize for this. Okay. As the Galactic Republic's power and influence expanded further out into the galaxy, many new areas of the galaxy were being incorporated into the Republic. This caused a need for reorganization of senatorial representation, which occurred in the year 1000 BBY. The most common reorganization of these new territories was to group regions into sectors in approximately 50 inhabited worlds, where each sector was represented by a senatorial delegation. When the number of the senators became too large, sectors were organized into roughly 1,000 regions, each represented by one delegation to the Senate. So, essentially, as the Galactic Republic grew, power and influence in more worlds were being incorporated and becoming members of the Galactic Republic. Just simply sending one senator from each planet became problematic, so they had to subdivide it into sectors and regions, where you would have senators coming to the Galactic Senate, but sometimes a senator would represent an entire region or an entire section of space which his home planet is also from. But hopefully that's what I just gave you there is pretty much it's pretty much self-explanatory, hopefully. So let's move on. The Galactic Senate was headquartered in an enormous building on the planet Coruscant, where it contained many floating platforms, each of which contained several senators. Each of the platforms in the Senate represented one sector of the galaxy, with one senator from each planet in that sector in that sector. Some of the platforms represented individual worlds, while others represented the powerful corporations and guilds. As such example as the Trade Federation. Okay, that's an example. As the senators, the leaders of the individual member planets also shared the power to vote in the Senate and introduce legislation. The Senate also followed the parliamentary rules as vote of no confidence, which is a formal impeachment of the sitting Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. So we see examples of that even in movies. You can relate to that. Some of those platforms or some of the seats in the Galactic Senate were reserved for whether that was originally the concept was originally in the Galactic Constitution. I don't know, but they were led by powerful corporations and guilds, and they had their representative in the Galactic Senate, such as the Trade Federation. And if you watch Episode 1, that's why it's so important to see the prequel trilogy, is because it does give you the foundation of all this material, even though people don't relate to it that way. But I see it very important. Like, if you understand the Trade Federation, how the Trade Federation was working in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, then you will understand the role of corporations and guilds like the Trade Federation. You'll understand how the government of the Galactic Republic works. Also, the vote with no confidence. Okay, that was more so in England, the way they do with the Prime Minister. But this is a formal impeachment. If the Senate or somebody doesn't feel like the Supreme Chancellor is ineffective and a weak leader, they can vote for no confidence in his rule. And then if the Senate votes for it, they can vote him out of office. He's impeached, he's voted out of office, and then they have to elect another Supreme Chancellor. So hopefully that's self-explanatory. But moving on. In the Galactic Senate, senators received one vote in all matters, both procedural and substantive. The Supreme Chancellor, the executive branch of the Galactic Senate, was elected from within the Senate. The Assembly was in turn divided into individual committees, each specializing in specific fields of government administration, and which were responsible for creating legislation to be reviewed by the full Assembly. So that's interesting. Remember, I said that they've broken up they have the Grand Assembly of all the senators in that hall, with a platform seats. But they also had broken up the subcommittees, and they talked about governing issues and laws and things that should be brought up within the Galactic Senate. And these were the special individual committees. So they discussed government administration and then came up with suggestions on laws that should be established or voted on in the Galactic Senate. Well, essentially that was what that was for. They created legislation to be reviewed by the full Assembly. And interesting enough, this is probably closer to England than the United States, because we as the people vote for our president. But in the Galactic Republic, he's voted on. There is the Galactic Republic vote. Excuse me, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Okay, the executive branch, the Galactic Senate. Whereas, like I said, let me repeat this. Like in the United States, we elect our president. But in the Galactic Senate, they elect. It's not the people who are voting for the Supreme Chancellor. It's the Galactic Senate, and they vote from one of them. They vote who's going to be elected in the executive branch of the Supreme Chancellor. So interesting enough. Let me go on to this last part of the legislative branch. Even though legislation that was passed by the Senate was binding to all member worlds, most of the everyday legislation was created on the local level through the sovereign rights and privileges of the planetary, sector, and regional level. Therefore, the main functions of the Senate were to mediate disputes between members, provide for the common defense, and regulate intersystem trade. So it's interesting because when they have some major issues, they debate that in the Galactic Senate amongst the full assembly. But a lot of the everyday things, laws and traditions, they were decided on the local level. It means individual planets or a sector or regional area of space where all the star systems were located. They chose certain laws and traditions. Keep in mind, they were allowed, like I said, the Republic allowed a certain form of autonomy for each of these planets and sectors. So that's how they basically govern their lives on their lives and administrated their laws and government according to the regional level. Much like the same way with the states. In the United States, we have the federal government, but each state is allowed, to a certain extent, have their autonomy to have the state's own government, and known traditions and laws, and government administration. Anyway, I think I covered that pretty well. Hopefully, I'm not getting anybody confused. But anyway, moving on, let's talk about the executive branch. The second branch of the Galactic Republic's government is the executive branch. The senators of the Galactic Senate would elect a supreme chancellor from amongst their ranks, who would serve as the Republic's head of government, and by default, head of state and chief diplomat. Even though the Galactic Republic was a constitutional monarchy, the office of Supreme Chancellor was largely powerless, and the Chancellor served mainly as an officiator of parliamentary procedure and the first among equals in the Senate, although the executive branch had the authority to call an extraordinary session of the Senate. So we're learning about, like I said, both England and the United States, we have a form what we call elected. Of course, I don't know if the United States refers to itself as a constitutional monarchy, because we don't have kings, and we never had a royal family. But England has. So there's a such thing as a constitutional monarchy. They keep the monarchy, there's a monarchy, but the leader, whether it be a president, prime minister, or supreme chancellor, they're given limited authority. I mean, they're supposed to act like the king and the leader, but they're given a limited authority. But unfortunately, the way it evolved is that sort of evolved to the point where the supreme chancellor, he was largely powerless, and he almost becomes somewhat like a figurehead. We could see Chancellor Finis Valorum, which I will be talking about in this blog. Actually, I think I might be talking about that next week. But anyway, and the Supreme Chancellor was largely powerless, and he served mainly as the officiator of parliamentary procedure. But also, too, he did have the power to call an extraordinary session of the Senate. So he could bring up particular important issues that he felt or needed to be discussed and voted on by the Galactic Senate. So essentially, that was a role or so of the executive branch. But anyway, moving on, the Supreme Chancellor was elected from among the senators who made up the Galactic Senate. Okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I apologize. Okay. The Supreme Chancellor was elected from among the senators who made up the Galactic Senate, and had a term limit in office of 4 standard years. The Supreme Chancellor could legally serve for 2 terms that equaled 8 years in office before he or she had to step down and vacate the office. So anyway, just reviewing back, I just got done talking about how the Supreme Chancellor is not elected by all the regular citizens of the Galactic Republic, but is elected by the Senate, the Galactic Senate. But he's also, too, the Supreme Chancellor. It wasn't like an outsider that came in and was elected by the Galactic Senate. It was a senator, a senator in the Galactic Senate that was chosen. Who ran? They had a free election, with certain ones being nominated for consideration for that office, and then they had a vote in the Galactic Senate who was going to be that Supreme Chancellor, and pretty much that's how they vote. That's how they chose, or that's how they got their Supreme Chancellor for for the Galactic Senate, for the executive branch of the Galactic Senate. And interesting, it said that they have a term limit, 4 years, and they can only do 2 terms, which equal 8 years in office. It's very similar to our American government. A president can only serve 2 terms, and each term is 4 years long. Now, keep in mind, I said that it equals 8 years in office. That means basically saying that if something happened to a Supreme Chancellor, he was impeached or died or incapacitated or whatever, then someone else would take over, almost like the vice president. So that didn't count as part of the first term. It was finishing the term of the other previous Supreme Chancellor. But when he ran, if he or she decides to run, when they're elected from amongst the Senate, then they're allowed 2 terms, 2 full terms, 4 years each, equaling 8 years in office. And then they had to step down and vacate the office at that point after their 2 terms were up. And of course, that changed. I don't want to go into this at this point. I'll go into the history, how that was changed with Palpatine because of the Emergency Act amendments they made to the Constitution to give the Supreme Chancellor more powers under the Emergency Act of the Separatist crisis. But I'm not going to talk about that right now because that will be covered in history for next month's blog on the history of the Galactic Republic. But now moving on, let's talk about the judicial branch. The third branch of the Galactic Republic government is the judicial branch. The judicial branch was split up into 2 main types of courts, which were the Supreme Court and the Regional Court. The Supreme Court was the highest court of law within the Galactic Government, where it was headquartered in the Galactic Courts of Justice building on Coruscant. So, we know that the hall, the senatorial hall, for the legislative branch, the executive branch and legislative branch of the Galactic Senate, but also there's the other building of Galactic Courts of Justice building on Coruscant too, that housed the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in the Galactic Republic is equal to our Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, by the justices. And it's interesting because they have the two different ones. The Supreme Court was the highest court in the Galactic Republic, but they also had smaller courts to deal with issues, local issues, to basically govern on local issues and decide through lesser issues unless it was appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. But anyway, let's move on. I don't want to get too bogged down and tied up with all the information. The Supreme Court consisted of 12 justices, with each addressed as Your Honor, with the highest one being the Chief Justice, who headed both the court and the judicial branch. The Supreme Chancellor apparently had the influence to appoint judicial judges to the Supreme Court, most likely through nomination. So they had the Supreme Court of the Galactic Republic, the highest court, the Supreme Court, essentially was consisting of 12 justices, 12 judges, where they had to vote on, if something was constitutional, consistent with constitutional law or not. And basically, you have the Chief Justice. He's the leader, although one who was equal amongst the 12 justices. 12 justices. But there was one known as the Chief Justice, who was the head of the court. And it's interesting. The Supreme Chancellor had the power to appoint a judicial judge to the Supreme Court. And most likely did it through the nominations. That's exactly how we do it here in the United States. Is the president, through nominations, votes on or had influence. They have influence on who they're going to get nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, pretty much the Galactic Republic works that same way. Moving on, the Supreme Court served as a court of last resort. Okay, quote, court of last resort, unquote. When in the lower regional appellate courts could not resolve a criminal case, ultimately the 12 justices interpreted constitutional law and determined constitutional legality of various social and legal issues. The Supreme Court also tried cases involving the most important matters in the Republic, such as the political corruption in the Senate. However, at least some cases, including the trial of senators for treason, were handled internally by the Senate. That's very important to understand. Very important to understand, because is referred to as a court of last resort. Well, that's when they appeal it. If they, if there's certain laws, or they're appealing a guilty verdict in the lower courts, in the regional courts, then they can appeal it, through an appellate court, all the way up to this the Galactic Supreme Court. And basically, that's why they call it the court of last resort, because their vote, when you go up that high, when you appeal it, something up to the highest of the Galactic Supreme Court, then their vote is the final vote. But ultimately, their job, just like it is for the United States, just like it is supposed to be for the United States, that the U.S. Supreme Court is supposed to interpret constitutional law and determine constitutional legality of various social and legal issues of the law. They're not supposed to make law; they're supposed to interpret the law and interpret the Constitution to see if it's consistent. That was their essentially their job, their main job. And also, too, the Supreme Court also got involved when it was proven there's political corruption in the Senate. But however, there are some cases, like in times of war for treason, that was handled directly internally by the Senate. And of course, if you remember the Clone Wars Season 5 finale, where Ahsoka was being tried for treason and murder before the Galactic Senate, well, essentially that's an example of, during wartime, how the Galactic Senate takes that power of judicial branch, and they essentially they try a senator, or in this case with Ahsoka, a Jedi, for treason and murder. So that was basically the due process was done, and the trial was done internally by the Senate. So hopefully that's laid out and understood. Everyone can. Hopefully I did a good job explaining that, not making it too confusing. But anyway, let's move on. The regional courts were the lower courts that handled matters of law among non-senatorial context, that served the average citizen of the Galactic Republic, and handled cases of criminal law, torts, and matters of disputes among your average citizen. The courts apparently had the legal right to try the same case more than once, which would mean that the Galactic Republic's judicial system had no concept of double jeopardy. And I find that very interesting. It's because in a democratic society, there's certain laws when trying a case. In the United States, and I think in England as well, I'm not expert in British law, but I know in the United States that when the lower court, or when the Supreme Court, not Supreme Court, but anyway, when the lower courts, the regional courts, okay, when they vote on something, when they have a trial, and the accused is able to be acquitted at the end of the trial, in the United States, they can't retry that person over again, and they call it the double jeopardy clause. Meaning jeopardy, that means your life can only, because if you get found guilty in a court of law, whether you're guilty or truly innocent or guilty, that means your sentence shall be carried out. You'll be put in jail, or you'll be executed even for those heinous crimes. But the thing is that your life or your liberty is in jeopardy. That's why they call it double jeopardy. Your life and your liberties. So it's a law. This is, the government can't just keep trying until they can get you convicted. you only have one chance at the batter's mound. You've got to either make a home run or you lose. And once that court, if the accused is able to be acquitted in a court of law, they can't. The state can't go find more evidence and retry him. That's called the double jeopardy clause. But unfortunately, it seems like, in spite of the fact of how liberal and progressive and basically liberal and progressive the Galactic Republic is, and the Galactic Senate with the democracy, they did have that one fault where they didn't have the double jeopardy clause, meaning basically if you got acquitted, their attorneys or whatever can at sometime in the future can go back and retry you for the same case that you tried again. So they didn't have a double jeopardy clause, unfortunately. But the lower courts, like I said, they pretty much what I was talking about before. They weren't like the Supreme Court, which interpreted constitutional law and established whether something was consistent or contradictory to constitutional law. Their job was essentially to try cases for criminal laws, torts, which are lawsuits, and matters of disputes among average citizens. So that was pretty much the role there of the judicial branch of the Galactic Republic. But let's move on to something that's very fascinating. Like I said earlier in this blog, I'm going to be dealing with the Galactic Republic or Galactic Senate's relationship with the Jedi Order, but that's what we're doing now. Its relationship with the Jedi Order. By the time the Galactic Republic was formed in 2553 BBY, the Jedi Order had already existed for several hundred years on the planet Tython. Less than a century since the formation of the Galactic Republic, the Jedi Order pledged its support for the new government, and thus became formally answerable to the Galactic Senate. In spite of the Jedi Order's allegiance to the Republic, the Jedi Order had always maintained a high degree of autonomy to act as they saw fit, especially regarding internal Jedi affairs. Although for thousands of years the Jedi Order consistently served the Republic in a variety of capacities, whether the Jedi would act as special emissaries, peacekeepers, or warriors. But basically, it's interesting because when the Galactic Republic was first formed and they encountered Jedi, it wasn't too long after before the Jedi Order basically gave their allegiance to the Galactic Republic in order to be the defenders and the peacekeepers. But the Jedi Order came in existence a little while before the Galactic Republic was born. But essentially, essentially, keep in mind, I don't want to go too far into deep in this, but the Jedis were originally supposed to be like monks, just meditators in the Force. They weren't supposed to be warriors. But later they did become warriors, and they became defenders of the Galactic Republic, which I'll get into whenever I do get around to doing my blog on the Jedi Order. But one of the things that they insisted on, which they got, is that they had to they required that they maintain a high degree of autonomy. That means basically the Senate, even though they work for the Galactic Senate does not rule them, and sort of like a hierarchy of law and authority. The agreement is that the Jedi Order was to maintain a certain amount of autonomy. They were supposed to act and govern themselves, and they were supposed to judge. Affairs amongst the Order itself, not through the Galactic Senate. It was, but they did maintain a high autonomy. If you remember in Episode 3, where Palpatine appointed Anakin to the High Council of the Jedi Order, well, essentially they accepted that, but they did not make Anakin a Jedi Master, because it was sending a message saying, these are perilous times. We have to act. These are perilous times, and we have to make some compromises, which allowing Anakin to be appointed to the Jedi. They didn't like that. but they allowed that. But they didn't give him the rank of master, not only because he wasn't ready for it, but because, in addition, they were sending a message to Palpatine and the rest of the Galactic Senate that basically they are still in control of their own affairs. That Jedis will take care of Jedi affairs, and they're not going to let the Senate rule them and determine their governing amongst themselves. Essentially, they're not going to allow the Senate to control them and basically rule on their behalf. That the Jedi Order was going to basically police themselves, administer the law to themselves and their society, their order. So they maintained a certain always maintained a high degree of autonomy. But anyway, moving on. Throughout the millennia, the Galactic Republic gradually expanded its sphere of influence over the known galaxy, in which the Jedi acted as keepers of the peace, and in which the Jedi acted as keepers of the peace and justice throughout the Old Republic. This brought an unprecedented level of peace and prosperity throughout the Galactic Republic, which resulted in an irreversible trend of political corruption, decadency, and social stagnation. But in spite of that, the Jedi Order maintained their strict traditions and principles, often acting as a beacon of honor and integrity within a society that was becoming increasingly immoral and unjust. The greed and corruption that permeated the Republic's government had a major impact on the Jedi Order, as many Jedi became disillusioned with the Republic and disgruntled that they had to be accountable to a galactic government that was steeped in corruption and ineffectual due to many senators' apathy towards social justice. So that was how the continuing conflict is over the millennia, especially the last millennia, the last 1,000 years before Episode 1. Or we could say circa around 1000 BBY, how this, which I'm going to talk about next month when I deal with the history of the Galactic Republic, is how this unprecedented peace, no conflict, except for very local minor disputes, there was a galactic peace for 1,000 years. And they got very complacent, but they also, through that, many senators became corrupt. The Jedi Order continued to maintain their autonomy, and they had a high strict law, and they didn't want to be corrupted by the corruption that was in the Senate, the greed and the corruption and the evil that was in the Senate. They didn't want to become that, so they tried to maintain their honor and their codes. So they stand as a beacon of light, a beacon of example for the rest of the galaxy, especially the Galactic Senate, on what is true and right instead of corrupt and decadent. So anyway, but the Jedi Order did become disillusioned with the Republic. And they didn't like how they always had to answer to the Galactic Senate. They thought that they were, at this time, over the last 1,000 years, that they were losing the goal or the vision of the Order because of how much the Galactic Senate was trying to pressure them and roll over them. And there was always that point of contention, that point where they're struggling with each other, where the Senate wants to control the Jedi Order, and the Jedi Order want to maintain their traditions and their laws through autonomously from the Galactic Senate and the government of the Galactic Republic. Okay, let's move on. Throughout the history of the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order, the Jedi were strong-armed to intervene on behalf of the Senate by diffusing internal and external threats to the Republic's stability. The Jedi Order was at times forced to take a more hands-on approach to the Republic's government itself, mainly by temporarily commandeering the executive office of the Supreme Chancellor, mainly due to the ineffectual actions by the Senate to resolve internal conflicts. It's interesting because, like I said, remember that tension that's between the Jedi Order and the Galactic Senate? Well, the Galactic Senate was constantly using them to take care of small internal conflicts within various parts of the galaxy. And they handled, if you remember that statement from Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, we refer to as aggressive negotiation. Well, the Jedi had their own form of aggressive negotiation. That means if the Senate or any of their delegates or representatives or the heads of these corporations, they couldn't come to an agreement, basically the Senate would send either the Supreme Chancellor or the Galactic Senate would send the Jedi to resolve the conflict. And essentially, when the Jedi showed up, it was sort of like, okay, let's create this peace, let's come to an agreement, or we're going to solve it for you with a lightsaber. Essentially, that's what the Senate was trying to use the Jedi Order for. But sometimes when they knew that the Supreme Chancellor or any of the senators were corrupt and they committed illegal things, sometimes they felt, in the name of security, that they had to, right or wrong, that they had to basically take out or remove the Supreme Chancellor or the senator by force, and they would take over for a time, governing in that office until it was able to have a proper election and elect a new Supreme Chancellor. But anyway, let's move on. After the 7th Battle of Ruusan, in which the Jedi thought they completely destroyed the Sith, the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order were able to enjoy 1,000 years of unprecedented peace throughout the Republic without having to worry about another galactic scale war. At that time, which was 1000 BBY, the Galactic Republic demilitarized the armed forces of the Republic, but that put an even greater burden on the Jedi Order to fulfill their role as peacekeepers throughout the Republic. As it fell to the Jedi Order alone, by the sudden lack of strong military force, in order for the Jedi to maintain stability throughout the Galactic Republic. That's something that's very interesting. So one of the mistakes that they had made, is that when they entered into this 1,000 years of peace, the Galactic Republic entered this one, they became complacent, not only allowing corruption in the Senate, but also they demilitarized. They mothballed most of their military equipment and ships and stuff. So essentially, the Galactic Republic demilitarized their armed forces. But this had an unfortunate side effect, because once they demilitarized and didn't have a standing army anymore, because they felt too comfortable. They felt that they had no internal or external threats to the galaxy. So they demilitarized their entire military infrastructure. But this put more burden on the Jedi Order, because the Jedi had to pick up any kind of major conflict which needed a military response. They relied on the Jedi to take care of that, again through this concept of aggressive negotiations, like I was just explaining. And the Jedi Order did not like this. As a matter of fact, if you can remember in episode 2, where Palpatine was talking about that his talks with the Separatist were going to be effective, he says, and Mace Windu says, I hope so, because we're keepers of the peace. We're not an entire military, so you can't fight a war just for the Jedi alone. They need help from a Galactic Republic military to back them up, which it happened in the story with the clone troopers. But we'll get to that later. There's more detail to be talked about that later. But anyway, moving on. During the twilight of the Galactic Republic's existence, the relations between the Galactic Senate and the Jedi Order became increasingly strained more than ever in their history. The Senate was filled by a large majority of self-serving delegates who cared nothing for the troubles of their constituents, effectively reducing the few honest members to an ineffective collection of senators with little hope of restoring honesty to the government's body. The Jedi Council grew even more disgruntled with the Galactic Senate, to the point where they believed that no politician could ever be trusted. On the other hand, the Galactic Senate also began losing faith in their ancient protectors. When the Separatist crisis came about on the galactic scene, where the galaxy was on the verge of being split into two halves, many senators came to doubt that the Jedi Order's ability to defend the Galactic Republic and its government. But in spite of that, during the Clone Wars, the Galactic Senate did not hesitate to commission the Jedi Knights and Masters as officers who commanded the clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic in order to combat the Separatists and their droid army. So it's interesting, like I was saying, it's that because of the corruption and complacency, within the Galactic Senate, very much discouraged the Jedi Order, and the Jedi's became very disgruntled with the Republic, and felt at times that there was no honest senator, even though they were the quiet ones who didn't stand out. Most of the corrupt ones, and the ones he compared, they were the most vocal. And at times, the Jedi's felt that there was no honest man or woman in the Galactic Senate, and that they become very disgruntled and discouraged because they felt that they were being held, they had to be held accountable by them, but they're corrupt, where the Jedi were trying to maintain their honor and their traditions through this. But it's interesting because by the time the Separatist crisis came about, which was something that panicked the Republic, the Jedi's weren't acting as their military force. I mean, they were keepers of the peace, as Mace Windu said, but they couldn't act as a military. And then what happened was in the Galactic Senate, then they started to lose faith. They started to lose faith that the Jedi, once their ancient protectors, are now ineffective. But actually, it was their fault. It was Galactic Senate's fault. But needless to say, that when the Separatist crisis broke out and the Clone Wars began, that they became the Jedi. This Galactic Senate used the Jedi as generals in amongst the clone troopers, which is named the Grand Army of the Republic. So anyway, hopefully I'm not confusing anyone. But if we just move on. Let's deal with the economy. Okay, the Galactic Republic had influences on the galactic economy that was linked to its regulatory powers, production of Republic dataries, and authorization of relevant bodies. Okay, pretty much that's just a description of the Galactic Republic's relationship to their galactic economy. The primary source for the galactic economy was planetary trade. Interplanetary trade tended to support local economies on various planets throughout the galaxy, but the high levels of economic interaction and the massive scale of exchange required to be funded by interplanetary exports. While some planets maintained their own shipping fees, most relied on large freight firms. So hopefully that's self-explanatory. Let's move on. The corporate sector was formed in the year of 490 BBY to free the Republic lawmakers and the corporate moneymakers from their differences. During the last millennium of the Galactic Republic, guilds were formed for commercial interest in order to influence legislation and be able to achieve greater efficiency. While most of these guilds, like the Trade Federation, Techno Union, and the Commerce Guild, collapsed after the Clone Wars, a number of surviving members flocked to the corporate sector authorities. So if you're familiar, you watch the prequel trilogy, you should be very familiar with these individual guilds and corporations, like the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, and the Commerce Guild. And anyway, I think that's pretty much self-explanatory. So let's move on. Although thousands of currencies were used across the galaxy, the Galactic Republic's dataries were perhaps the most widespread form of currency. Because of the Republic's size and influence in the galaxy, if I'm pronouncing that right, dataries were accepted on the majority of all worlds, with the exception of some remote planets. The Republic's data credit were backed by the wealthy planet of Munilence, if I'm pronouncing that right, the planet Munilence, and the intergalactic banking planet, the Munes. That was the home planet, excuse me. I apologize for the bad pronunciation, but essentially that's where the center seat of the intergalactic banking planet. And the Munes the race of the Munes, they were head of the intergalactic banking clan. Essentially, that's who they are. And just like what we talked about, our money being backed by the gold standard in the United States, well, their dataries, their credits were backed by the wealth of the Munalist, or the Munes of the intergalactic banking clan. So hopefully that's pretty much spelled out, self-explanatory. Let's move on. All working citizens in the Galactic Republic were required to pay income taxes, which was collected by the Republic Tax Collection Agency. In the latter years of the Galactic Republic, a transit tax of 50% was levied to raise revenue for the government. Of course, we know about the Republic's income tax, or their taxes. That's why the Trade Federation, of course, through their greed, felt it was that they didn't appreciate the tax. They thought it was unjust. So that's why the Trade Federation put a blockade around the planet Naboo, if you've seen Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But anyway, I think that's somewhat self-explanatory, so I just wanted to briefly cover the economy before moving on. Let's talk about the society and culture of the Galactic Republic. There were many diverse cultures in the Galactic Republic. Star systems that were members of the Republic were given a limited form of autonomy that enabled them to maintain their own culture in accordance with local beliefs, customs, and traditions. Also, there was a wide variety of different cultures, from religious communities to hive-like communities. And again, I covered that. I talked about that a little bit, how the government of the Galactic Republic, almost like they're acting like the federal government of the United States, the government of the Galactic Republic ruled over all the regions, all the member worlds of the Republic. But they also allowed a limited form of autonomy, so they can continue to carry on their particular laws, their customs and local beliefs, their religions, and their communities. And so essentially, they had that limited form of autonomy, unless some of the laws and traditions contradicted the Galactic Constitution, because keep in mind, the Galactic Constitution trumps any other laws or any other traditions within the Republic. So, but anyway, let's move on. The Galactic Republic had an open and liberal policy towards the arts. The dominant aesthetic style of Galactic Republic era was opulence and ornamentation. So, I don't think I need to go into too much detail over that, just to throw that out for part of information about the arts and the styles and traditions of the Galactic Republic. Let's see. Let's move on. Despite the Galactic Constitution and its highest law clause of the right of sentience amendment, the dark spirit of humanocentrism still existed in the Republic, as some citizens still held racial and prejudicial ideologies. Well, that's true. It's not to be, it's not like how they brag in Star Trek, where, like in Star Trek, the Federation has a certain mentality and a certain worldview where everybody's all equal, and they've evolved to that. Yes, the Galactic Republic has evolved very progressively towards seeing that all creatures, aliens and humans and the such, all sentient beings, are equal. There's still the corruption in the human heart, the corruption of beings, especially the human heart. They still held on to the prejudices and the racism ideals. Now, they couldn't act against them because the laws of right to sentience amendment in the Galactic Constitution, basically governed their lives. And they weren't able to act on any forms of prejudice and racism, but they still had that attitude of humanocentrism and speciesism. Anyway, pretty much that's all I have to say for that. So let's move on. Now we're getting to the military. During the early period of the Galactic Republic, and as the Republic expanded throughout the galaxy, they encountered many warlike species. In order to deal with this threat, the Old Republic built up a significant army and navy in order to defend themselves and keep the peace. The Republic's military forces would serve throughout many conflicts, including the Great Hyperspace War, the various conflicts of the old Sith Wars, as well as the new Sith Wars, and the absolute ravenous Great Galactic War. Not to be confused, Great Galactic War, not to be confused with the Galactic Civil War, which we saw in episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Star Wars. But basically, they did, in the beginning, throughout the millennia, the Republic did have that, did have a significant military force until that 1,000 years of peace, which they mothballed everything and demilitarized the Republic's army. But anyway, I will be going in next month when I talk about the history of the Galactic Republic. I will cover things like the Great Hyperspace War, the Old Sith Wars, and the New Sith Wars, as well as the Great Galactic War. But let's moving on. After the Rusan campaign during the end of the New Sith Wars, approximately around 1000 BBY, a consequence for the Republic's unprecedented millennial galactic peace, the Republic decommissioned much of its military, retaining a small force only for the security purposes. After the Galactic Republic decommissioned its military, they inadvertently started to rely more on the Jedi Order to be keepers of the peace. Well, we just covered that. I just covered that, how their relationship with the Jedi is that after they decommissioned, demilitarized and decommissioned their military, the Galactic Senate had no. The Galactic Senate had, by default, had to depend, more on the Jedi Order to be keepers of the peace rather than their own military force. So anyway, pretty much what I said there is self-explanatory from what I have explained. So let's move on. Several trade corporations, such as the Trade Federation, the Intergalactic Banking Clan, and the Commerce Guild, kept their own security forces in order to protect their profits. But unfortunately, they often abused their power, as in the case with the Battle of Naboo and 32 BBY. So it's interesting, and we even fear this independent companies that are being outsourced by the military. Well, you have something here similar with the Trade Federation or the Intergalactic Banking Clan. They built up their own, so they built. It's almost like they had their own autonomy from the Galactic Republic. They built up their own military force, and as you can see with the droid army of the Trade Federation as an example. And that became problematic, but I won't touch on that right now. We'll talk about that later. Moving on. There were many individual planets and regions that maintained their own security forces, such as Naboo's Royal Naboo Security, Naboo's Royal Naboo Security Forces, or Corsac from Corellia, and these were sometimes used to defend against small threats to their star systems. Places like Naboo had their own, and other planets with their form of autonomy were allowed to build up their own military force to defend their planet against threats. So I think that's pretty much the rest is self-explanatory. So let's move on. Everything changed. Everything changed during the time of the Clone Wars, beginning around 22 BBY. The Galactic Republic had no standing military to combat the threat posed by the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and thus the Military Creation Act was proposed, which would utilize the Kamonians' clone army, which they were creating, so that the clone army of the Republic could combat the massive droid army of the Separatists. So we see that even, remember, like I said, with Mace Windu says, negotiations they better not fail, because if they do, the Jedi are only keepers of the peace, but not an army. And they soon realized that. That's why the Military Creation Act eventually went through, and they obtained the clone troopers from the Camino and Kamonians, and they used them to battle the droid army of the Separatists, or what is officially known as the Confederacy of Independent Systems. But anyway, I think I covered that. I pretty much covered that. So let's move on. The astrography. So this is basically the region with the Galactic Republic control. What is the extent of the Galactic Republic in space, in the galaxy? let's deal with that. The extent of the Galactic Republic was composed of a significant portion of the known galaxy, with the core worlds essentially being the epicenter of galactic civilization, which stretched from the colonies, the inner rim, the expansion region, the mid-rim, and the outer rim territories as well. But in spite of the fact that the Republic extended to the outer rim, the government held little power in the outlying regions. Essentially, just like I said with Tatooine, the Hutts controlled Tatooine, so that's why slavery was allowed on that planet. So even though technically, for the majority, I just named all the regions of space in the Star Wars galaxy, the outer rim territories were problematic in some sectors because the Republic, the laws didn't have influence. It was more so the influence of their own native species, or of the Hutts, or maybe certain corporations like the Trade Federation, or something like that. But that's why the Republic, even though the Republic extended its influence to the outer rim, there was a lot of sectors and planets the government of the Galactic Republic did not have power over. So, but anyway, let's move on since I've covered that. The number. Okay, yeah, a little power in outline region. Okay, the number of civilized planets in the Galactic Republic fluctuated over time, ranging from a little over 1,000 in its early days to as late as 21 BBY. It ranged approximately to 1.3 million planets. The Galactic Republic capital was Coruscant, which was the cultural economic center of the galaxy. So basically, I just quoted there, the growth of the Galactic Republic from its early days up until the time of the Clone Wars, which was 21 BBY, actually began in 22 BBY, the Clone Wars did, like 22 through 19 BBY. But by that time, which the movies, I would count the 6 movies as the modern period of the Star Wars galaxy, of the Star Wars universe, the modern period, the planetary membership was 1.3 million planets, which is a lot. Some of them were the native inhabited species, some of them were uninhabited, and some that were terraformed or technology controlled, so you can live on that particular planet. But that 1.3 million planets were members of the Galactic Republic by that time, by the modern period of Star Wars universe. Now keep in mind that the epicenter of galactic civilization was the core worlds, and the Galactic Republic capital world was Coruscant, which I've already covered in this blog. And so essentially, even on Coruscant, you can see it had members and facets of all different races, alien races and humans and cultures and stuff. So it was like the melting pot, almost like New York. You think of New York being. So essentially, that was the structure and the extent of the Galactic Republic for their astrography. Astrography. That's the extent of the Galactic Republic's influence over the galaxy. But anyway, I think it's time that I end this blog. I would go on, but to go on to the history of the Galactic Republic. That will be next month's blog to finish us off with part 2 with the history of the Galactic Republic. But anyway, I think it's time that I should end this. Blog. I wanted to thank you and everyone else for watching my video. I want to thank you. I wanted to thank you and everyone else for watching my video. And if you like my video, I ask you to please subscribe to my channel to get all the latest updates. I cherish all my subscribers, and I try to respond to everyone who gives me a comment or so, to give you the respect and that you've given to me. And like I said, next month's blog for the month of October, I'll be concluding this with the Star Wars Mythology number 3, the Galactic Republic, and part 2. This was part 1. Next month will be part 2, which is the history of the Galactic Republic. With that being said, I want to wish everyone a good day, and may the Force be with you.